Let's kind of go down the table here for introductions again for those folks who weren't here at the beginning. Christine, could we start with you?
Sure, yes. My name is Christine Lewis. I'm Metro Councilor for District 2, which is communities of West Linn, Lake Oswego, Oregon City, Milwaukee, a lot of unincorporated Clackamas, Happy Valley, and some parts of Southwest Portland.
I'm Ken Humberston, Clackamas County Commissioner. It includes all of that.
Except for Southwest Portland.
Except for Southwest Portland.
Good morning. I'm Robert Kellogg. I'm a member of the Tualatin City Council.
Good morning, Rachel Prusak, and I'm State Representative for House District 37, which includes West Linn and Tualatin and the area we're in now.
Good morning. I'm Russ Axelrod. I'm the mayor of West Linn. I've been active in Stafford issues the last, 10 years or so.
Skip O'Neill, Lake Oswego City Councilor, and as well been involved for 6.5 years as a councilor, so I've kept abreast of what's been going on.
Okay. Well, this is rather unstructured on purpose, so we did kind of float some questions to these folks that they might want to address. I can go right down the line and ask people to start off if nobody else wants to go first, but Christine, could I ask you to kind of go first and give some comments and we can just work down the table?
Sure, thank you. Thank you for this forum. It was great. I showed up and I was relieved to see coffee because that's what I need to get my brain working. But then actually some really good discussion, putting some texture on where conservation and agricultural uses are in line. And I wanted to spend my time today talking a little bit about Metro's role looking through the conservation lens. And Metro has, since the 90s, really put a focus on protecting open spaces and natural areas because the role of city and county parks is oftentimes recreation and not really that conservation lens. So when Metro runs parks, we do so with the eye of protecting clean water, protecting access to nature. So in our regional investment program, we've gone to the ballot multiple times, including in 1995 and in 2006, and we're looking to go again this year in 2019 with a parks bond. And Stafford Basin has been a bond investment target area. In 1995, there were 3 acquisitions totaling 18 acres, and then in 2006, we went all the way up to 187 acres. So Metro has invested here in the Stafford Basin in order to protect riparian areas, in order to really examine where are we protecting access to nature. And the Wilson and Pecan and Fields Creeks areas are of significant habitat that needs to be protected. So those are some of our guidelines for when we're looking at protecting access to nature. So really just here today, learning particularly about how easements have been used successfully. Metro has managed not only land that we've bought, but we've managed easement as well. So that's something I'm interested in continuing the conversation on.
Thank you. Ken, we're going to open up for questions after we get kind of through everybody, then we can kind of go from there. Ken?
So maybe a little bit of history. About 70 years ago, right after the war, Levittown was built, and that was truly the first real suburb in America. And shortly thereafter, along came freeways. And we've developed over the last roughly 70 years this suburban interface between the rural and the urban areas. And I think now we're beginning to realize that we have to rethink that development model. If we're going to protect the farmlands for future farming and for our own food supply, then we can't continue to do things the way we have been doing them. We're going to have to look at how do you densify already developed areas, the urban areas, and make those systems work, which is going to need a variety of different kinds of public transportation systems and higher density in those areas. It's going to be imperative that communities such as this be politically involved, politically astute, and aware of both the political and financial pressures that are going to come to bear on areas that are close to the urban core that also produce food. Clackamas County currently is 53% forest. It's 35% developed in small cities and suburbs, and it's 13% farmland. Our fundamental choice is, do we sprawl onto that remaining 13% and then bring our food from someplace else? Or do we densify the existing communities, both suburb as well as urban, and stop spreading on the farmland? In order to make that happen, you will have to be politically involved and politically aware. As I've suggested to a couple of people today, you should make sure that you have a representative of this community at every planning commission meeting of all 3 of the cities in this region to be aware of what's going on. It may not have issues on any given day that has to do with your community, but you need to know who the people are on those planning commissions and city councils. You need to know what their issues are, what's important to them, what their philosophies are, and you need to have those relationships. You also will need to look for opportunities where you can support them and their agenda, because at some point in time, you're going to be asking them to support your agenda. And there's always a give and take in the political arena. So I guess I'll leave it there for the moment. We have a fundamental choice to make as a region. How much of our farmland do we want to preserve, or do we want to let it go? And how do we preserve it? And I'll stop there.
Thank you. Robert?
Yeah, good morning, everybody. I want to first thank all the presenters today. I thought the information from the general down to the tools that are made available, not only as legal uses, but also practical and political uses, I thought really good information. I hope everybody takes that to heart. With respect to the City of Tualatin's role in planning the Stafford Basin, as most of you know, there are several intergovernmental agreements that have defined and sort of narrowed the issues, but there's still a lot of open space to be filled in. In those IGAs, in particular the 2017 5-party IGA, there is specific language about preserving the agricultural history and the lands here in the Stafford area. Now, what it doesn't do is specify where those are. And as you know, there's a lot of work to be done between the 3 cities to talk about who's responsible for which jurisdiction, and then planning land use along with transportation and how this whole area is going to develop. While the City of Tualatin hasn't taken any official position, its history is very supportive of nature and conservation. In particular, the city's been a tree city for 35 plus years. It has an extraordinary amount of parks that are award-winning, well-maintained, and in fact, we just spent a great deal of money on a parks master plan to make sure that plans are included in future development. For my own personal part, I grew up in Missouri, in an agricultural region of Missouri, and so I'm very familiar with farms both large and small. I went to New York City to pursue my career as a lawyer, where they don't have a lot of farms, and you miss that open space, I can tell you. So when I came back to Oregon, I got involved in a local nonprofit, and what they do is they provide seeds and plant starts to anyone who's willing to grow them, and donate 20% of the yield to the food bank here locally. And this year, that nonprofit's donated over 4,000 pounds of food to local needy folks. And so that's an example of how even very small-scale agriculture can make a difference. And again, thank you for the presenters today. I mean, it's really, with climate change and everything else that we're facing, it's a great reminder to say, if we don't have the food, or if we don't have the farms, we don't have the food. And so as we do our planning on Stafford, I, for one, will be keeping that information close to heart and to mind. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Rachel?
Thank you. Thank you to everyone for being here. I think that it's so important when we get everybody from the city and the county and the state, local communities together to have these conversations, because we each have our own perspective and our own role. With that being said, I missed this morning's discussions because I'm seeing patients on weekends, so hopefully I can see those slides. However, I have done a lot of research and took some notes on what the other panel members were just saying. But to start, I would say that it's so important to protect what makes Stafford so unique. And in my position in Salem, that means hearing from everybody and knowing what everybody wants in Stafford. Just this week, I voted on something to protect what makes Stafford unique by voting on annexation, and I will continue to do that. And I think the bill that's in Salem that everybody should know about is House Bill 2729. And that's where my role comes in, where I advocate for the millions of dollars that are being asked to preserve what makes Stafford unique. And I am very, very happy to do that. I am fighting as hard as I can for all of the things in Salem, but there are a lot of special interests, a lot of organizations with money. And so, as other panelists were mentioning, showing up whenever you can, however you can, and in my opinion, forming coalitions. Whether it's with the food bank, who comes to Salem a lot, whether it's with all of the farmland owners and agriculture owners and all of the people that feel the same way you do, because when the coalitions form, you're more powerful when it comes to asking for money. I have advocated for this by meeting with the bill sponsors, and will continue to do so. But I'm more excited to be here and learn from you and from the other panel members about how we can do that together. So thank you.
Russ?
Thank you, John. I didn't have anything prepared. I didn't know we were going to have an opening statement, but I do have a few things to say, and I'm hoping we come back, and I would like to talk a little bit more about the IGAs that have been signed recently, and particularly playing off some very astute comments and experience of Alan for the Helvetia farm, which there's some direct corollaries here with Stafford. Tom McCall was brilliant in this concept of the urban growth boundary, and our land use controls and rules that we have in Oregon, I think are, they're excellent, and they serve our communities in many ways. But sometimes even the vision, in my mind, can be lost in the kinds of environments that we're creating in our communities. And just because we have an urban growth boundary does not mean that we need to fill every corner and niche of that boundary itself. There is so much important things that we need to consider in terms of the land use, the values, their attributes. How do they fit into the community? How do they serve the community? And I feel there's been much too much pressure from development interests to just, plow and pack on as many homes and as much development as we can on lands, viewing this as sort of this best end use or high end use. This is the pressure that Stafford has been under. But when you look at the data, when you look at the interests of the community, when you look at the particular needs of the cities and the challenges that our cities face now with issues of transportation, housing, affordability, and the like, we need to really look at our mistakes, and we've made many mistakes in our developments of our communities. We need to bring those lessons learned, and I see Stafford as just a ripe opportunity. It's sort of like, it's not virgin land, of course, but it is a virgin piece. It is a piece of land that we can really be and demonstrate tremendous stewardship for the entire Portland area. I'm just so excited about that opportunity. And I'm really excited about the opportunity afforded by our IGAs, which are going to allow us to do this. And I hope we get a chance to talk about that. Don't be discouraged by this room not being full, too. I think this is a great start and just the beginning of the conversation, and I hope we have many more, and we work on outreach to fill this community, because there's a lot of great interest in the community about the Stafford in our region, and people are passionate about it, and I am too, and we all are, and I want to thank all the panelists for being here too, so I'm looking forward to questions and addressing things.
Well, we'll try to circle back on the IGAs after we finish with Skip.
Skip O'Neill, Lake Oswego City Councilor. Want to say highly proud of our city for many, many years of purchasing property in the Stafford area. Obviously, you heard from an individual here who has great pride in growing food on our property there. And I would like to thank Metro for working with us. We just finished purchasing another property. And we have a couple of other properties in mind in the Stafford area that we're looking at. And we also have over 600 acres of parkland in Lake Oswego. So yes, I believe that Lake Oswegoans have been good stewards of the Stafford area. We want to preserve that relationship with our fellow cities that border us, West Linn and Tualatin, because Stafford Road runs right through the center of this area, and we would have probably the biggest impact of any city if there was some substantial growth that went in there through housing. So anything that goes on in there, I'm happy that we have teammates that we can all work together and, you know, come with a really good plan for now and into the future.
Thank you. So Russ, did you want to say anything about the IGAs or start a discussion about that before we go to questions? Or?
Okay, sure. Were there any questions specific about it, or?
No.
Okay.
No.
So, you know, a lot of people ask, why the IGAs? You know, why have we gone to, you know, if you back up a little bit, back in 2009, the county's task force, you know, looking at the criteria and the factors for where you consider what lands meet the factors for coming into urban reserves, you know, Stafford failed miserably. And in fact, the county's own task force unanimously determined that they didn't meet the factors. And yet we faced ourselves with pressure to do something about it. Once the county and Metro ignored its own recommendations of the task force and moved this process forward to bring the lands into urban reserves. One of the things we saw, which similar to what Alan had experienced, that resulted in the Great Bargain, is this pressure from special development interests and interests at the legislature to try and legislate our land use. And after a long stretch of litigation, you know, we were advised really the best approach was to bring the control back to the cities where it belonged. You know, cities, land use, cities should be controlling the land use in our communities. And the only way to do that was to actually create the IGA that put all the power back into the city's interests. And so that was the big impetus for moving forward so that we could, you know, sort of put a squash on the other pressures, if you will, and to establish a framework at which the cities could work cooperatively together with the community and with the hamlet to help see the vision through in the future, to remove those pressures. A lot of people don't understand that, but it was really to bring the controls back to the cities, which is really the inherent root of our land use in Oregon, that we had been getting away from. So that, in essence, was kind of the thrust of how we ended up there. But it's kind of not really clearly understood by many.
Ken?
Yeah, Russ, I'm glad you touched on that because Clackamas County, for many, many years prior to my service on the board, has allowed a lot of areas to be essentially urbanized, but not be inside of cities. And we're paying the price for that today. There's a lot of resistance to the growth that we know is coming in those very areas, and yet they're the most logical places for some development to occur, especially the densification. So doing this is one of those situations where let's not do the same thing over and over and over again that has caused us the problems that we're currently facing. I also want to give some credit where it's due here today. Tom Hughes reached out to Commissioner Bernard and I when he became chair and I first got this job. And he offered the opportunity to develop an IGA between Metro and the county. That was the first step going forward. Mr. Hughes did not have to reach out and do that. When you consider the contentiousness that had existed between Clackamas County and Metro at that time, that was a very generous thing for him to do. The end result of that was the 5-party IGA that is now in place. And I want to also give credit to Charlotte Lehan, a former member of this county commission, whose land use knowledge was very helpful in putting together the 8 principles that exist in the 5-party IGA. Without that kind of cooperation, we wouldn't be here today. I also want to give credit to Jeff Goodman, who was a city councilman from Lake Oswego, who put a great deal of effort into bringing the cities on board to the point that we actually have an IGA, both at the 5-party level and at the 3-party level, that had 31 elected officials sign on unanimously, and that guarantees that the community of Stafford has its voice heard in any and all planning going forward by the cities. However development does or does not occur, this community's voice will be heard. And quite frankly, that for me was the #1 principle that we had to make sure was enshrined in writing. So I think it's important to remember that there were people that kind of put it on the line, and Tom Hughes being a specific case in point. I also want to encourage this community to work with Metro in looking for opportunities to support what Metro's charge is in land use planning, so that when you go to them on an issue that's important to you in Stafford, you have a relationship built on mutually working together, not just coming to them only when you feel like your ox is being gored. It gives you much more credibility when you work with people in a cooperative way and help them with their responsibilities, so that when they help you with yours, there is a mutual give and take. So I'll leave it at that for the moment.
Thank you. Rachel, Christine, can I go back to you? Pick up on Ken's point there. How can this community work with Metro better or different or more in the future?
Yeah, absolutely. So to begin with, I am 13 weeks into this job, so I am trying to be out in community as much as possible, but it's a two-way street. So let me know when you have things going on, things like this, but also challenges that you're facing. And one that I hear time and time again is our transportation challenge. And we are sitting in gridlock. We are unable to catch public transportation that gets us anywhere useful in Clackamas County. And we are unable to walk or bike safely through connected system. So I hear this in every community, and then you look at Stafford, and Stafford Road is one of the roads that has risen up through community voice to potentially being considered as we think about regional corridors. But you know what, it is not rising to the top right now when you look at some of the data of, comparatively. However, I know that safety, it is a road that we need to really take seriously, because you can sit there for 10 minutes not moving an inch. So congestion and safety are issues on Stafford Road, but then how are we going to bring that up to the regional level in this conversation where it's got some stiff competition with 99E and 43 and Sunrise? So when we're talking about regional needs at Metro right now, transportation is really driving where we're going for the next couple of years. But again, we also have land use that at this point is a settled issue. As I walk into my seat, that we're looking at urbanized reserve. So engage, be part of the conversation, but know that transportation is kind of the keys that are in our hands right now.
Thank you. So we did get one question that kind of touches on traffic, and maybe you've already answered it, or if somebody else on the panel wants to tackle it, but as the surrounding areas develop, traffic on Johnson Road to Stafford increase, is anything being done to mitigate traffic? And I guess you just addressed that it's on top of Metro's list. In the county, Ken, do you know of anything going on?
Yeah, I suspect that's one we'll have to answer. As you're probably all painfully aware, the county passed a VRF just about a month and a half ago. After 32 years of trying to get the public support for local funding for roads, the county commission made the decision. It, I believe, was the responsible decision to make. There will be a citizens committee, and I would encourage people to get themselves involved in that citizens committee that will be working with our transportation department to determine the priority of projects and what projects can be done, both in terms of road maintenance as well as carrying capacity. It'll be a couple of years before the first money actually hits the bank account where we can actually start putting it into the roads. But I can tell you this, every dime will go into county roads of the 60% that we will get, and the other 40% that will be going to the cities will be going into the city's roads, and none of it will be going into PERS, which is one of the rumors we sometimes hear, or anything else, because by law, it must go into the roads. So, which I think, quite frankly, is a good thing. It keeps it from being a slush fund for the elected officials. So the roads in Stafford, if they are of priority to citizens in this community, please get your name into the Public and Government Affairs offices of Clackamas County and ask to serve on that committee. There is an old expression in politics, it's if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. So I strongly advise, I can't say this enough, how critically important it is in all aspects of the political process. Please be involved and make sure your voice is heard.
Okay. Russ, you had some comments?
Yeah, well, I wanted to first, we sort of jumped past the Metro comment, and I'll put little Christine on the spot just a little bit. You know, Metro already has significant investments in Stafford, and sort of bringing this back to the Stafford and the land use. They have lands, open space lands been purchased along the East Fork of Wilson Creek. And one of the Metro is also coming out with a bond, a new open space parks bond. They're actually renewing the past bonds this next year. And I'd like to see Metro strengthen its investments in Stafford, and particularly in the riparian corridor areas, so that we can expand on the reserves that we've already invested in as a community, and they're fairly substantial already. There's a great opportunity, and the timing is good. If we can get community pressure and maybe some organization around what in the new open space bond might we incorporate as a project goals in Stafford to expand those investments we've already made, and particularly the riparian areas, to preserve those and the connectivity that's needed. I think that would be really a really great thing to work on.
Yep, thank you, Mayor. And coming back to my opening statement, it's about 200 acres that we've already invested in protecting in the basin. And 2019 target areas do include Stafford, but community voice is always appreciated as we are looking at about the next 6 weeks to really firm up not only how we're going to spend the funds. We consider our spending to generally be in kind of different programs of everything from, one, taking care of what we have, so capital improvements on our parks. That's everything from some trails and access to, frankly, making sure that we have restroom and picnic table facilities so people can get out and see these spaces. But two, it's nature and neighborhood grants, and it's making sure that nature next door gets recognized, and that's really where Stafford can come to the front. And then additionally, local share to make sure our local municipalities can do this work and connect along the urban-rural interface. And I mentioned earlier that the Stafford Basin bond investment proposal calls out our tributaries along the Tualatin that include Wilson, Pecan, and Fields Creeks. So if those are of importance to you, it might sound silly, but send me an email. Make sure that we're bringing that forward from the community side.
Okay, we got one more last question, then we'll open up to the mics. This one is, how does the county ensure the development in the Stafford Hamlet complies with RFF5 zoning? Well, Ken, did you want to try to answer that one?
I'll try my best on that.
Okay.
Under the current situation, whatever the zoning currently is, as I understand it, and if I'm incorrect on that, feel free to correct me, but I believe the current zoning stands as is at this time. So we will not be changing what the zoning is. I think that would answer your question. If it's zoned RFF5, that's what it is. We're not changing it.
That's correct.
Those changes will not occur, if they're going to occur at all, until the cities have comprehensive plans that the communities had a voice in going forward.
Okay. The second part of the question is, when and how are neighbors or nearby landowners notified of new development in logging?
On logging?
Yeah.
Well, in terms of the rural areas, the current code requires it's either 500 or 750 feet notification. Given the size of properties in rural areas, I came to the conclusion that that's a bit too small. So I've asked staff to take a look at the possibility of increasing the notification distances to a quarter to a half a mile. So staff are working on that as we speak. There's been no proposal directly brought to the county commission at this point in time, but I'm expecting one sometime within the next few months. Needless to say, we're working on a lot of other things at the moment also, like the budget, which is the big one. But there's a recognition, I think, that 500 feet just doesn't cut it when you're talking about a rural area in which you have anywhere from 5 acres to literally 80 acres. And that would mean very, very few would get notification. So we are working on trying to make a change there.
Just curious about that. Is that in relation to the recent logging on the Wisteria property, or is this in a broader sense? Was that question? I'm curious.
The answer was yes. The wisteria, I think.
it's-
There's a lot of
Yes,
logging in
that
wisteria.
was very troubling, poor management of the property. Yeah.
But if
Okay.
there's obviously a limit to what the county can do
Yeah.
if it's privately owned land.
Right.
As opposed to publicly owned land, and especially lands that the county owns. Because we try to do a greater than necessary approach when we do logging on county-owned lands.
And I'll add to it and I don't know if I'm 100% accurate on this, but what I'm thinking is House Bill 2729, which is the language we speak in Salem, is how this will be protected from happening in the future. And I can read exactly how this bill states, which is appropriates money from general funds to Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board, OWEB, for purposes related to programs for grants from Oregon Agriculture Heritage Fund. And so I read all the testimony, and this is something that Stafford area would be really interested in. I read all the testimony for this bill, and Oregon Association of Conservation Districts, something they said that stood out was, as Oregon continues to face pressure on its productive agricultural land, from development, population growth, succession challenges, and more, there's an urgent need for the voluntary tools that the Oregon Agriculture Heritage Program is designed to provide. And they're urging us to support the $10 million funding. So it comes down to funding and money. But this bill is designed to protect this land from these things from happening. So.
Okay. Questions? If you have a question, can you come up to the mic? And Lynn, you want to come on up?
Hi, I'm Lynn Schauber, Stafford Hamlet Board, and also Borland Owners Association Board. Specifically for Christine, your property that Metro has right now as far as parkland, you've got the little piece that's behind Nathan Creek School, the Nature Conservatory, or what do you, plant farm, I guess you call
Borland
it?
Station, yes, yeah.
And the other question on that, do you have currently any property up on Wilson Creek, or are you looking for acquiring property there? If you know that.
I'm looking at a map that does show a parcel that is along Wilson Creek. We can look at the map together later, if that helps you.
So you do have some property there already? Okay,
Yeah, from a
that's what I thought.
2006 target area acquisition, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's what I maybe wanted to bring up. And just to follow on from what Ken said about the notification limits, I was at the planning meeting when they are putting together their recommendations for the commission, and that was one of them, to increase it to half a mile, which I appreciate you're also going forward to do, because that's one of the things that we've noticed, that when notifications come to the planning department, very few people get notified because of the limits that are presently in use. Thank you.
Dick, did you have a question? Three.
I'll just ask one and sit down. And I'll start at this end. To the representative from Lake Oswego, I'm wondering if you see a dichotomy in today's farmland preservation segment with the LO Park Department's recent application to take some of your property out of EFU to build a BMX bike park. It just seems like a conflict to me, but maybe not to you or LO. Do you see a conflict in your goals?
Well, right now, that's something that hasn't even been discussed by our city council. I know that our Parks Department has aggressive views of lots of different lands that we own. It doesn't necessarily mean that that's what's actually going to happen on that land. So for me to comment, I'd be commenting only on my personal views, not necessarily the views of our citizens, but I think that will be highly debated here in the next 2, 3, 4, 5 months.
Councilor Cummings?
Hi, thank you all for being here, and thank you for having this forum. Seems like one of the main focuses of this forum is for farmland preservation, and we've learned a lot of really important things about how this important resource can be protected in a various number of ways. And so my question is, for you, Ms. Lewis, with Metro, and forgive me, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but if you happen to have any idea of the criteria for this upcoming bond, is there some room in there in the criteria for the conservation easements and some of these mechanisms to be exercised in this case? Because we really haven't done that in the past that much, have we?
So we are in development right now of what the criteria are. So I can't speak to what they are because they're being written. And easements have been used by Metro in the past. Not as much because the management of easements, ironically, is of higher maintenance on not the operation side, but kind of internally, compared to buying outright. So Metro has made the choice many times to buy outright, but conservation easements are already in our program. We manage them throughout the region. So it is a tool, and I'm led to believe that the easement program would be funded through this bond. It's just about making sure that we're connecting the easement program and this target area.
Yeah, because it just seems like there's so much potential here, just like with Sovie's Island, how popular that is and important in that area. And, you know, this is down in this region, and there's just so much potential here for sustainability, education, ag tourism, you know, so many things that we haven't really invested that much in before, but it looks like this is a great opportunity.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
right. And
Okay.
we did actually have testimony this past week about the value of easements. So the council has heard about easements, and
Yeah.
it is, again, is a program we have. We haven't leaned on it as much as direct investment, but I will definitely make sure that I stay, you know, I've heard from my community easements are important, and particularly in connection to this one target area.
Thank you. I think there'll be a strong appeal for that.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Okay. Any more questions? One more from Dick?
2 more. 2.
This one is to the mayor of West Linn. On one end of the table, your neighbor Metro bought 200 acres. And on the other end of the table, your neighbor bought 150 acres. But over the last 30 years, West Linn hasn't bought any acres at all in Stafford. Now, I know you can't speak for your predecessors, but what is the reluctance? What's holding West Linn back from buying what it wants in Stafford?
Interesting question.
Wow.
That's kind of what I was thinking.
Yeah. I don't think anything really is holding West Linn back. We see our investment and role in the IGA and the participation as critical to helping parse out the future of the hamlet. So there's a process and a structure, if you will, about seeing the preservation of lands and things that we would like to see in West Linn. You know, at this point, our city, to my knowledge and understanding, hasn't considered purchasing of other lands in Stafford. But that doesn't mean that we're not interested, invested in the future of Stafford. So should that become an element that's of interest or desire or somewhere in some way helps to frame the approach to carry out the vision of what we would like to see in the hamlet, that's certainly, I guess, a tool that could be used in the future. But to my knowledge, that specifically has not come up. So the investments that I've seen, aside from Metro, have been, to my understanding, only those, for example, Lake Oswego, which is on land directly that abuts West Linn land currently. So I guess in the future it could be a tool that we consider.
Okay.
In the early 2000s, a former West Linn council did put a measure on the bond to see about purchasing some land in Stafford. And the primary interest was to use it for athletic fields, that sort of thing, perhaps some kind of sports recreation complex idea. And there was interest in it, but it didn't pass. The main reason for this is we don't have very much flat land for field space, but there was interest in it. Then 2 years ago, we had a parks bond, a series of parks bonds that were expiring, and so we were looking at whether to try to renew them for more parks projects. And so a whole process of surveys was done, and the parks bond survey that West Linn conducted did not show a high level of interest in major developments towards big, shiny new, parks projects. Most of the message coming away from that was to take care of what we have, because West Linn had made quite a few investments in parks, acquired land, and had developed a lot of really beautiful parks because of that last parks bond. What we didn't ask, what wasn't really asked, and so what we don't really know is what the level of interest would be for agricultural preservation. And that would be an interesting question to ask. I personally think there'd probably be a pretty high level of interest just in my years of listening to people and why the West Linn, about the percentage of people, when we do survey, when people want to know what West Linn's interest in preserving the character of Stafford is, the percentage of people that want to see the character preserved keeps going up, and it's somewhere near 80%. And I would assume that a lot of that has to do with valuing it, what is there now, mainly.
A bond measure may pass to preserve it.
Possibly.
That would be an
Yeah.
interesting thing to find
Yeah,
out.
it would be interesting to find, survey that and, get specific information on that. Thank you.
If I could just add to that too, West Linn has very much favored and been supportive of the Hamlet's vision. And the Hamlet's vision right now envisions just these kinds of uses. So there is, in our sense, some people have said, well, you know, you have to work on your concept plan. You should be starting to work on your concept plan for Stafford. But our viewpoint is, hey, we have a draft concept plan here in the Hamlet's vision. And there are many elements, almost all elements really of the Stafford Hamlet's vision are supported very strongly in our community. So in establishing this IGA and the structure moving forward and the vision already being worked on by the Hamlet, it's pretty much been the spirit and understanding of our community that we're moving toward those goals. Yeah.
Yep. One more quick one. Then we're going to have one more question, and then we're going to have the folks do some closing comments, and then we can mill around and ask questions later.
Thank you very much. To the state representative, the incoming governor of California initiated litigation with the city of Huntington Beach on coming in to compel them to accept more growth. They had a city plan to not grow, and it ran afoul of Californians' density ambitions. So we have a state entity suing a city to make them accept new residents. In your opinion, could something like that happen in Oregon?
That's a great question. I am, as Metro Councilwoman Christine mentioned, on the job for 12 weeks now. So new on the job. I would say in my 14, jumped forward a couple weeks, 12 weeks of experience, what I hear is most representatives are listening to their communities to protect local areas how they want to see it. Allow local counties and cities to have more of a say. So what I have learned now, I can't imagine that happening. I don't know if anybody else up here has more experience to speak to that, with their experience with other.
Well, don't we have a bill on the House floor, Bill 2001, to increase density and eliminate single-family zoning in the state of Oregon?
That is true.
Well, then let's
That's a problem.
get on it.
That is true. I would hope that in the Oregon legislature, if it whichever way it went, that the state wouldn't sue certain cities and end like that. But that is another bill that a lot of people are following and have voiced their concern. And I know right now, like everything that happens, has a lot of different amendments and conversations about how they're going to proceed. But I have heard from the mayors from all of the cities that I represent on it. So, thank you.
Okay. Any other comments? Oh, Ken.
A direct answer to the gentleman's question is yes, it could happen,
Yes.
quite candidly. So be aware, be involved, because if you're not, there are people who, and I don't like to phrase things, generally speaking, in right and wrong, good and bad terms, because they're just simply, most of the time, differences of opinion on what should be done, or how it should be done, or if it should be done. And when you start phrasing things in absolutes, it makes it difficult to find common ground and get something done. But in general, yes, the state would have that authority and could do something like that. So if you don't want that to happen, the best defense is a good offense. Get involved and stay involved and aware at all times.
And I would agree with Commissioner Humberston is that I have faith as I spoke to it, but we need voices, and City Council, County Commissioner, Metro, Salem, of the people. That's who I work for. So, yeah.
So what was the number of that bill, 2001?
Yeah.
2001, yeah.
Okay, well,
HB. If I could just add to, I think House Speaker Kotek, who introduced that bill, I think her principal goal was to really push the envelope on how we're addressing affordable housing in our communities. Not so much that it would be put into law in that specific context of eliminating single-family housing. The bill is being amended weekly. It's likely to get through the House, as I understand it, but I'm understanding in the Senate, it may not get through the Senate. A lot of people are giving input, but it's stirring certainly the conversation on affordable housing. And I think there's a lot of good spin-offs from that discussion, and there's critical need to address affordable housing. And I think it'll come out of that proposed bill, but I don't think actually, I'd be curious if the bill will actually end up going through.
Yeah, and I'm not on any of the committees that's happening, and I'm not in the rooms where all of this stuff is happening on that bill. I sit on Healthcare and Ways and Means Committee. But what I know is that we need to find a solution to our housing crisis, and if part of the answer is changing some of the zoning from single family to multiple family so people can build for their aging parents to live on their same lot, then we have to have those conversations. Whether this bill goes too far or not is what soon I will be hearing more about in my role. House Bill 2001. And then the other bill I mentioned was House Bill 2729, which is already to Ways and Means, asking for $10 million, which is, you know, a whole other level of what we're doing in Salem, is finding the money for all of the resources, all of the things that organizations are asking for. And so we're having the conversations about revenue and how we fund things.
Ken?
I just want to point out that there's an actual contradiction in this whole process that isn't actually being spoken to. We are talking about increasing housing for low-income housing, and yet we're also talking about protecting farmland. So what it really does in fact mean is you're going to have to increase density in the already developed areas, or you're going to sprawl onto the farmlands. So this is a two-pronged problem, and our state, probably most states, are going to have to wrestle with how we address this question. And in terms of the affordability issue, we have built a national economy, for the most part, based on paying as low a wage as we can get away with. And the end result of that is the poverty you see in the streets. 2/3 of the people that are homeless right now are there because they can't afford the rent, not because they're not working.
And cost of health.
They are, in fact, working. Just to give you, and as you probably know, I tend to be a bit of a numbers guy. $15 an hour sounds like a great increase, and it is a good thing to do. But let me tell you what $15 an hour actually means. It means $31,000 a year for an individual. When you take about $5,000 away for Social Security, Medicare, and the other things that have to be taken out, and taxes and so on, you're down to about $26,000. When you take $26,000 and divide it by 12, and then divide it by 3 to get to the 1/3 of your income that should be for your housing, that's $725 a month, give or take. Tell me anywhere in Portland you can rent a doghouse for $725 a month. There are 3,065 counties in America, and only in 17 of them does minimum wage get you a one-bedroom apartment. In no county in America will minimum wage get you a two-bedroom apartment. So the reality that we are dealing with, folks, is that until wages are in the $20+ an hour range situation, all government can do is put a Band-Aid on the most desperate housing situations for the most desperate people. So some people always ask me, why do I always shop at union stores? It's because they pay living wages. I don't shop at Walmart for a reason. They don't pay living wages, and they train people to take welfare while they're paying them the cheapest wage they can get them. We have to look at this as a society and decide for ourselves, do you want to pay taxes to support somebody's housing and their health care, or do you want people to be self-reliant? If you want them to be self-reliant, you have to pay them a living wage, like the last great Republican once said, Teddy Roosevelt. And he said the following: a man should be able to work 8 hours a day, to support his family, have 8 hours of rest, and have 8 hours to give back to his community. I'll leave it at that.
Any other closing comments before we say thank you for being here? No? Okay. Well, we should give another round of applause for these folks. Okay, thank you.